When it comes to discussions about the war in Ukraine here in the United States, and I think also in Europe, one of the most common topics that is always brought up is the money and how expensive the war is. And a lot of times you will hear this point brought up in a way similar to this, where people will say, look, I support Ukraine, or at least I definitely don't support Russia. But warfare is really expensive, and as much as I would like to, my country cannot afford to continue supporting Ukraine. Now, this is something that I don't really blame people for thinking because of the way that everything has been framed about the war in Ukraine over the course of many years. But I wanted to make this video to dispel a lot of those rumors and to bring into actual concrete terms how expensive, or rather how inexpensive, the war in Ukraine really is. One of the things that has often frustrated me about journalists or talk show hosts, especially those who should definitely know better, is when they intentionally or not, and often intentionally, exploit gaps in human psychology to build a narrative off of, for example, numbers or statistics that are technically accurate, but that are completely out of context. And the thing that is especially prevalent among journalists and talk show hosts is that they exploit the fact that the average everyday person simply cannot grasp the reality of the scale that we're talking about when we talk about government money being spent. The fact of the matter is that for your average everyday person, they will never have access to all that much money over the course of their entire life. And the human brain is only capable of really comprehending numbers up to a certain limit. And when things start to get in the millions or the billions, our brains just sort of deflate and we don't understand what those numbers really mean. And a lot of times journalists will exploit this, for example, when talking about government spending that they don't agree with, to make that government spending seem much larger than it really is. So, for example, if you're somebody who makes a median wage of $50,000 a year, $1 billion sounds like an immense amount of money. And so when you hear, for example, that the United States has spent over $100 billion supporting Ukraine in its war against Russia, for a lot of people that becomes immensely frustrating because they think of how big that number is in reference to their own earning power, rather than in reference to the earning power of an entire nation of over 300 million people. And so it is important that we actually analyze numbers in context and break them down to a level that is understandable in terms of personal finance so that people can understand how much they are actually spending on the war in Ukraine, which, spoiler alert, is not very much at all. Let's start by just talking about the sheer size of the US economy. And for that, I'm going to just use a simple number, which is the United States annual GDP, which is a very good measure of the amount of economic activity that takes place in the United States every single year. That number is approximately 28 trillion US dollars. Which again, big numbers, our brains can't actually fully grasp that. So to put that number in context, I also want to use another huge number that our brains can barely grasp as it is, which is $1 billion. So imagine that the US economy, all that $28 trillion, was just $1. If that was the case, $1 billion would be worth approximately 1/280th of a single penny. So you would need 280 of these pennies, 280 of these billions to make a single penny if the US economy was $1. Now, to put that at another fraction that might be a little easier to grasp, if the U.S. annual economy was $100. $1 billion would be equivalent to roughly 1/3 of 1 penny. So if you have a $100 bill, ask yourself, how much does 1/3 of 1 penny matter to you? It doesn't matter to you at all. It is literally a rounding error. And so when you talk about personal finances, $1 billion is an immense amount of money that is unachievable. But with an economy the size of the United States, $1 billion is literally a rounding error. Now, to bring that all back into focus, let's use that $100 and ask how much of that $100 we have spent on Ukraine. So if the U.S. annual economy is $100, and the U.S. has spent approximately $100 billion on the war in Ukraine, our total spending on Ukraine combined over 3 years, not just 1 year, over 3 years combined, is just 39 cents of that $100. Now, I think if most people were told about the cost of the war in Ukraine in those terms, rather than constantly being told that it's costing us hundreds of billions of dollars, if they were told it's cost us a total of 39 cents out of $100 over 3 years, or just 13 cents out of $100 per year, most people would just stop talking about it and would stop complaining about it. And I know that's the case because if you were to go to a restaurant and let's just say you were overcharged by 13 cents, the vast majority of people would just let that go and eat the 13 cents because it's easier to just pay the 13 cents than to complain about it. However, what we see in the United States, and probably other countries too, but I'm not super involved in their politics, is exactly the opposite, where people will spend hours of their day, every single day, agitated and frustrated about what they see as the misuse of their taxpayer dollars because they don't understand those taxpayer dollars in context. So they will spend hours every day being frustrated about something that in reality, if they worked 1 extra hour every 3 months, they could overwhelm the cost of this waste. And it is a very important glitch in human psychology to understand, because people rarely can break things down and take them back to the basics. And because of that, people who want to get people to vote in a certain way, or move in a certain way, or take certain types of actions, they will intentionally take advantage of that. Now, that soapbox aside, I want to talk about why even the terms that I've already given to describe the cost of the war in Ukraine are actually over-exaggerated and do not accurately reflect the real costs, which are actually a lot lower. The number that I have been using up to this point, around $110 billion, does not actually reflect money that has been sent to aid Ukraine, but instead money that has been allocated towards being sent to Ukraine. And in reality, a huge percentage of the funds that have been allocated have not yet been sent. The last I checked, only about 10% of what was allocated was actually sent over. Now, that was several months ago, so let's be extremely generous, and let's just say that 50% of what has been allocated has now been sent. That already makes it a far lower number, and it gets even worse or even better depending on how you're looking at it. The money that is allocated towards Ukraine doesn't actually go directly to Ukraine. Where it initially goes is actually to U.S. defense contractors, and so it's money that will trickle through the U.S. economy, the vast majority of it, except for the cost of actual supplies. Now, even more than that, this money isn't just being given to these defense contractors just to build weapons for Ukraine. It is actually, in most cases, being sent to defense contractors to build things that they were already going to build. Because the U.S. military, what they do is they don't want to have old used equipment sitting around if it comes to war. They want new stuff that they know is going to work. It's kind of the opposite of Russia. So what we do on a regular basis is we cycle through our equipment and we send the old equipment to scrap yards, or we decommission it or whatever. So what is actually happening is that as we are decommissioning this old equipment, we are sending the old equipment to Ukraine rather than letting it basically go to waste or having an expense of having to actually decommission it ourselves. And the money dollar, the dollar amount that we're using to talk about what we've allocated to Ukraine, is the cost of building the new equipment, not actually the value of the old equipment that has actually been sent to Ukraine. So already this $100 billion, which was already really small, about 13 cents out of $100 per year, has been cut in half and then basically cut in half again. So I don't know what we're down to now. You can do the math. I think we're down to something like 3 cents as the actual cost. Now let's play devil's advocate and let's say that I'm wrong. Let's say that I'm using the wrong numbers. I've been using a starting figure of around 110 billion US dollars. Donald Trump says that that number is closer to $250 billion. Now, I don't know where he's getting that number. I've looked at this a lot, so have a lot of other analysts. Most people think that he got this number from Russia, or just that the number was made up or miscommunicated to him or something. Well, let's just say that that wasn't the case, and it was $250 billion versus $110 billion. Even then, the numbers are insignificant. Our number then goes up from somewhere like 3 cents to perhaps 6 to 7 cents out of $100. Again, a rounding error. But it gets even worse than that. Let's say that you are a real stickler, a real penny pincher. Hey, I respect that. We got to save every penny. And let's say even at 6 or 7 cents out of $100, you don't think it's worth it to support Ukraine because it's not our country, it's not our problem. Well, let's put the aid that we've given to Ukraine in context in relation to another number. So again, we've given 110 billion US dollars to Ukraine over 3 years. Let's compare that to the annual US military budget of approximately 850 billion US dollars. Now, of that $110 billion that we've actually given to Ukraine, not all of it, or rather allocated to Ukraine, not given to them, not all of it goes to military aid. A lot of it goes to humanitarian aid as well. And so I think the number that I usually see is around $70 billion has been given to Ukraine over the course of 3 years for military aid. Let's just round up to 80 billion, 85 billion, and let's call it 1/10 of the annual US military budget being spent over the course of not 1 year, but 3 years. Now, the US military budget, what is the purpose of that budget? Well, a major purpose of our military budget is obviously to counter our two main geopolitical opponents, being Russia and China. There's some more minor geopolitical opponents that get mixed in there, Iran, North Korea. But for the most part, most of our military spending, and in particular our really high-tech, really expensive military spending, goes towards countering Russia and China. Let's just call it half and half, or let's just even be generous, and let's say that Russia is 1/3 of that. Think about it. For the cost of less than 10% of our annual budget, Ukraine has not only held Russia at bay, but they have decimated pretty much the entire Russian military, where Russia literally has had to resort to using donkeys on the front line because they can no longer rely on their mechanized equipment. And you start to realize that the war in Ukraine has been a real bargain from the perspective of we don't need to spend as much money anymore if we don't want to, countering the threat of a militarized Russia. Now, in context, this is just really crazy because Russia spent 2 decades modernizing their military, and Ukraine dismantled that modernized military in just 2 years. And so supporting Ukraine with all of these things in mind, this has not been charity. This has been the best return on investment in military history. From that perspective, investing in defending Ukraine against Russia has been one of the best investments that has ever been made in world history, period. But it gets even better than that for the United States. The return on investment gets even better. Because a major part of military effectiveness is not just the quality of the equipment and the reliability of the equipment. It is also the knowledge in how that equipment will perform on an actual battlefield and the proper tactics and strategies involved in using that equipment. And supporting Ukraine has provided us with a lot of that as well. The United States has provided Ukraine with a lot of high-tech weapons systems that have not, to this point, prior to the war, been battle-tested. Now these systems have been battle-tested, and Ukraine is sharing information with us that are helping us to adjust and adapt our own strategies so that if we ever go to war with our own equipment, it will cost us less human lives because we know how to use them better. The cost of this training in terms of lives is not coming from American lives. It is coming from Ukrainian lives because we're not sending Ukraine soldiers, we're just sending them equipment. So at its net, what we are doing is sending Ukraine equipment that we were probably going to decommission anyways. Ukrainian soldiers are using this equipment to counter one of our main geopolitical opponents, who, by the way, is being aggressive. And then the knowledge that they share using that equipment comes back to us at no cost. And what you see is that the war in Ukraine is not so expensive that the United States cannot afford to continue supporting Ukraine. It's actually so affordable that from one perspective, we can't afford not to support them. Now, I hope all this information has been genuinely helpful for you. I know a lot of people know this, but they have trouble articulating it. So I hope it also helps you be able to just share this video to articulate all these arguments to people that you are trying to share these truths with. As you can see, it's very easy to twist the facts, but if we take everything back to the basics and we look at things for what they really are and not how our brains perceive them to be, things are a lot less costly and a lot less scary and a lot less frustrating than we might otherwise be led to believe. Now, if you appreciate having access to this analysis and other analysis like this as a tool in your tool belt, before you go, can I ask you for a quick favor? Would you consider becoming a patron of this channel and supporting my work? It's completely voluntary. It's just for people who want to do it. But a big reason I'm able to bring unique insights to the table is because I don't draw my salary from a newspaper. I don't draw it from a magazine or really from any other organization. And that gives me a lot of freedom of thought to put together things in a way that a lot of people just aren't doing. I hope to continue to be helpful for all of you guys. Be sure to also check out these videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.